Vanessa read the article, a small smile forming. They're feeling the pressure. Public opinion is firmly on your side, especially with those videos circulating. Another notification popped up on the screen, a text from Deshawn. Check the local news. Something big is happening at City Hall. Tiana reached for the remote and turned on the television in her room. The local news channel was broadcasting live from outside City Hall, where a large crowd had gathered. The reporter's voice came through clearly. What started as a small group of protesters this morning has grown to several hundred people, demanding accountability, not just from Officer James Mercer, but from the entire Springfield Police Department. Many are carrying signs with Tiana Jackson's name and the phrase, "I will fire you," a reference to Jackson's words before Mercer pointed his weapon at her. The camera panned across the crowd, showing people of all ages and backgrounds gathered on the steps of City Hall. Many held handmade signs. Some wore t-shirts with Tiana's words printed across the front. The turnout was astonishing. "That's because of me," Tiana whispered, sitting up straighter in bed. "Because of what happened to you," her mother corrected gently, "and because it resonates with so many people who've experienced similar treatment, but didn't have video evidence or public attention." Tiana's phone rang. Attorney Reed calling to discuss the day's developments. As her mother took the call, Tiana continued watching the news coverage, still trying to process how quickly everything was moving. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been a regular high school student setting up for a fundraiser. Now her name was on signs outside City Hall. Her words turned into a rallying cry for police accountability. The bedroom door opened again as Vanessa ended the call. "Thomas has big news," she said, an urgency in her voice. "They found Mercer." "Where?" "At his brother's cabin about 50 miles north of here. He surrendered without incident." Vanessa sat back down on the bed. "He's being brought to Springfield now to face formal charges. The district attorney is moving quickly because of the public attention." Tiana let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "So it's really happening? He's going to be held accountable?" "It certainly looks that way," her mother replied. "Thomas says the evidence is overwhelming. Between the videos, the witness statements, and Mercer's decision to flee the scene, the DA has a strong case." The news channel cut to a statement from Chief Williams, standing at a podium outside the police station. "We have located and taken into custody former Officer James Mercer. He will be brought back to Springfield to face charges including assault with a deadly weapon, criminal threatening, and civil rights violations. The Springfield Police Department is committed to transparency and accountability throughout this process. Former Officer Mercer." The word former caught Tiana's attention. "They've already fired him?" she asked, pointing to the screen. Vanessa nodded. "The chief called early this morning to tell us. He wanted you to hear it from him before the public announcement. The department held an emergency meeting with the police commission last night after we left the station. The decision was unanimous." A mix of emotions washed over Tiana: relief, vindication, and a strange sense of sadness that it had taken something so extreme to bring about this outcome. "They're asking if you want to speak at today's press conference," Vanessa said after a moment. "You don't have to if you're not up for it." Tiana considered the request, watching the crowds outside City Hall on the television screen. So many people had shown up to support her, to demand change in her name. She owed it to them to use her voice, to help shape the narrative around what had happened and what should happen next. "I'll do it," she decided. "But I want to say more than just talk about what happened to me. This needs to be about real change." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Whatever you want to say, I'll support you." 4 hours later, Tiana stood at the podium outside the Springfield Police Department, the cameras of a dozen news outlets pointed at her face. Behind her stood her mother, Attorney Reed, and a group of community leaders who had rallied around her cause. Chief Williams had just finished announcing the formal charges against James Mercer and outlining a series of policy changes for the department going forward. Now it was Tiana's turn to speak. She took a deep breath, glancing down at the notes she had prepared, then looking back up at the sea of faces before her. "Yesterday, I was just a high school student running a fundraiser for after-school programs," she began, her voice clear despite her nerves. "Today I'm standing here because an officer sworn to protect and serve instead chose to threaten and intimidate. He pointed his weapon at me because I dared to ask for his badge number. Because I dared to stand up for my rights. She paused, looking directly into the nearest camera. What happened to me isn't unique. It's not even rare. The only difference is that this time there were dozens of cameras recording. This time, there was evidence that couldn't be ignored or explained away. This time, the truth was visible for everyone to see. A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd gathered around the press conference. Many nodded, some called out in support. I'm grateful that Officer Mercer has been fired and will face criminal charges. That's accountability and it matters, but it's not enough. Real justice isn't just about consequences for one officer. It's about changing the system that allowed him to wear a badge and carry a gun, despite previous complaints against him. Out of the corner of her eye, Tiana could see Chief Williams shift uncomfortably. Good, he needed to hear this. I'm 17 years old, she continued. I shouldn't have had to stare down the barrel of a gun while picking up my phone at a school fundraiser. No one should. But since it happened, I'm going to make sure something good comes from it. She outlined the changes she wanted to see. Better training for officers, a more transparent complaint process, the creation of a civilian review board, mandatory body cameras for all officers on patrol. I said to Officer Mercer, I will make sure you're fired for this, and he was. But that was just the beginning. Now I'm saying to every police department across this country, we demand better, we deserve better, and we won't stop until we get it. The crowd erupted in applause. Tiana stepped back from the podium, suddenly overwhelmed by the response. Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pride evident in her eyes. As they moved away from the microphones, Chief Williams approached them. That was quite a speech, he said, his expression a mix of respect and wariness. You've given us a lot to think about. Not just to think about, Tiana replied firmly. To act on. The chief nodded slowly. Yes, to act on. He handed her a business card. I'd like you to consider joining our newly formed Youth Advisory Council. We need voices like yours if we're going to make real change. Tiana accepted the card, surprised by the offer but recognizing it as an opportunity. I'll think about it, she promised. As they left the police station, Deshawn and several other friends were waiting to greet her. They surrounded her with hugs and words of support. The crowd from the press conference had dispersed, but a few people remained, watching her with expressions of admiration. You're famous now, Deshawn joked, showing her his phone where her speech was already being shared across social media platforms. How does it feel? Tiana considered the question seriously. Weird, scary, but also important. Like I have a responsibility now. You do, her mother agreed, joining the conversation. But you don't have to carry it alone. Look around you, Tiana did. She saw her friends, her community, strangers who had shown up to support her cause. What had begun as a terrifying confrontation with one officer had blossomed into something powerful, a movement for change, a demand for accountability. In the days and weeks that followed, James Mercer would plead guilty to multiple charges, accepting a plea deal that included prison time and the permanent surrender of his law enforcement certification. The Springfield Police Department would implement many of the changes Tiana had called for, including the Civilian Review Board and mandatory body cameras. Other departments across the state would follow suit, citing the Mercer incident as a wake-up call, and Tiana, who had only wanted to raise money for after-school programs, found herself becoming an advocate, a voice for reform, a symbol of standing up to abuse of power. She spoke at community meetings, testified before the state legislature, and eventually founded a youth organization dedicated to improving relations between law enforcement and young people of color. It wasn't the path she had expected her life to take. But as she told a reporter on the one-year anniversary of that fateful night at the community center, sometimes the most important journeys begin with 4 simple words. I will fire you. And sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, even when you're afraid, the whole world stands up with you. The officer was fired, but that was just the beginning of the story, not the end. Chief Williams closed his notebook. We're conducting a full internal investigation, effective immediately. Officer Mercer's actions tonight violated numerous department policies, not to mention potentially breaking several laws. The fact that he fled the scene only makes things worse for him. And in the meantime, Attorney Reed pressed. In the meantime, the chief said, meeting his gaze directly, Officer Mercer has been suspended without pay pending the outcome of the investigation. Lieutenant Cooper has already collected his badge and service weapon. Once we locate him, he'll be brought in to face disciplinary action and possibly criminal charges. Tiana looked up. What kind of charges? Lieutenant Cooper exchanged a glance with the chief before answering. At minimum, misuse of authority and improper use of force. Possibly assault with a deadly weapon, given the circumstances. The district attorney will make the final determination once our investigation is complete. A knock at the door interrupted them. An officer poked her head in, her expression urgent. Chief, you need to see this. Chief Williams excused himself and stepped outside. Through the glass, they could see him looking at something on the officer's phone, his face growing increasingly troubled. When he returned, his expression was grim. The videos from tonight have gone viral. National news outlets are picking up the story. We've already received calls from 3 major networks and the Associated Press. Vanessa straightened. Good. People need to see what happened. Agreed, the chief said, surprising them with his candor. But it also means this case is about to be under intense scrutiny from all sides. We need to make sure we do everything by the book. Tiana watched the activity outside the conference room, suddenly aware that her personal experience had transformed into something much larger. What had begun as a confrontation with one officer was rapidly becoming a story about policing in America, about race and power and accountability. There's something else you should know, Chief Williams continued. This isn't the first complaint against Officer Mercer. There have been others over the years. Allegations of excessive force, discriminatory treatment, abusing his authority. But never anything this serious and never with this much clear evidence. So you've known he was a problem, Vanessa said, her voice sharp with accusation. And yet he was still on the force and still responding to calls in our community, still carrying a weapon that he pointed at my daughter. The chief had the grace to look ashamed. The previous complaints were investigated, but without video evidence, he trailed off, aware of how hollow the excuse sounded. Without video evidence, you chose not to believe the people who came forward, Attorney Reed finished for him. People who probably looked a lot like Tiana and her friends. The tension in the room was palpable. Lieutenant Cooper cleared his throat. That's why what happened tonight is so important. The videos don't lie. Officer Mercer can't explain away what we all saw him do. Chief Williams nodded. I want to assure you, Ms. Jackson, both of you, that what happened tonight will not be swept under the rug or minimized. Officer Mercer will be held accountable. I hope you mean that, Tiana said quietly, because I'm not backing down. Not now, not ever. Her mother squeezed her shoulder again, pride mixing with concern in her expression. None of us are. As if to emphasize their point, a commotion arose outside the conference room. Through the glass, they could see people gathering in the lobby of the police station. Dozens of community members holding handmade signs calling for justice and accountability. At the front of the group stood Mr. Washington and several other adults from the fundraiser, along with many of Tiana's classmates and their parents. Word has spread quickly, Lieutenant Cooper observed, looking out at the growing crowd. They're here for Tiana, Vanessa said, and for every other person who's ever been mistreated by Officer Mercer or anyone like him. Chief Williams watched the peaceful demonstrators for a long moment, then turned back to Tiana. I'd like to issue a public statement tonight, addressing what happened and outlining the steps we're taking. With your permission, I'd like to commend you for your courage and composure during an incredibly difficult situation. Tiana considered this, then nodded slowly. As long as you're also clear about what Officer Mercer did wrong and what you're going to do about it. No vague promises or police jargon. People deserve to know the truth. Agreed, the chief said with newfound respect in his voice. As they concluded the meeting, Tiana's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Deshawn. Tiana, you need to see this, he said urgently. Your video, the one where Mercer points his gun at you, it's everywhere. Over 100,000 views already. People are outraged. There are calls coming in from everywhere demanding that Mercer be fired. Tiana felt a strange mix of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also a heavy sense of responsibility. She had never asked to become the face of a movement, had never planned to spend her Saturday night giving statements at a police station instead of counting fundraiser proceeds. Yet here she was, thrust into a spotlight she hadn't sought but now couldn't avoid. There's going to be a press conference in an hour, she told Deshawn. The police chief wants to make a statement. We'll all be there, Deshawn promised. The whole community is rallying behind you. As she ended the call, Tiana turned to her mother and Attorney Reed. I want to speak at the press conference too. People need to hear from me directly, not just about me. Vanessa looked concerned. Are you sure, baby? You've been through so much tonight already. Tiana nodded, a new determination in her eyes. I'm sure. What happened tonight was wrong, and people need to understand that it wasn't just about me. It's about a system that allowed someone like Officer Mercer to patrol our community with a badge and a gun, even after previous complaints. It's about what could have happened if those videos hadn't been recording. Attorney Reed nodded approvingly. If you're ready to speak, I think you should. Your voice matters in this conversation. Outside, the crowd of supporters continued to grow. News vans had begun to arrive, setting up cameras and lights in front of the police station. Social media was ablaze with the story, the videos being shared and reshared, commentators weighing in, hashtags trending. Within hours, what had begun as a simple confrontation at a community fundraiser had transformed into a national conversation about police accountability, racial bias, and the power of video evidence in the pursuit of justice. And at the center of it all stood Tiana, 17 years old, still in the t-shirt she'd worn to the fundraiser, tired but unbowed, ready to speak her truth to the world. The response had begun. What happened next would depend on whether the Springfield Police Department was truly ready to address the problems within its ranks, and whether the community would accept anything less than real, meaningful change. The morning sun streamed through Tiana's bedroom window, casting warm light across her face. She blinked awake, momentarily confused by the late hour shown on her bedside clock, 10:17 a.m. Then the memories of the previous night came flooding back. The fundraiser, Officer Mercer, the gun pointed at her chest, the police station, the press conference that had stretched into the early hours of the morning. Her mother had insisted she stay home from school today, a rare concession that spoke volumes about how shaken Vanessa Jackson had been by the events. Tiana reached for her phone, wincing at the bright screen. She had silenced it sometime around 2 a.m., after the flood of notifications had become overwhelming. Now she scrolled through the missed calls, text messages, and social media alerts. News outlets requesting interviews, friends checking if she was okay, strangers offering support or, in some cases, criticism. The videos from the community center had been viewed millions of times overnight. Her name was trending on multiple platforms. It was surreal, seeing herself at the center of a story that had captured national attention. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Her mother entered, carrying a mug of tea and wearing the weary expression of someone who hadn't slept much. "How are you feeling?" Vanessa asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and handing Tiana the steaming mug. Tiana took a sip before answering. "Overwhelmed, but okay, I think." She paused, then added, "Have they found him yet?" Vanessa shook her head. "Not yet. Lieutenant Cooper called this morning. They've put out a statewide alert for Officer Mercer. His house was empty when they went to find him." The knowledge that Mercer was still out there somewhere sent an uncomfortable chill through Tiana. She remembered his final words to her. "This isn't over." At the time, she had responded with defiance. Now, in the light of day, the threat felt more real. "The chief wants to hold another press conference this afternoon," Vanessa continued. "They're going to announce formal charges against Mercer, regardless of whether they've found him by then." Tiana nodded, scrolling through her phone again. A headline caught her eye. Springfield PD announces review of all excessive force complaints in wake of Mercer incident. "Mom, look at this," she said, passing the phone. "They're reviewing other complaints too." Tiana looked directly into his eyes, refusing to cower despite her racing heart. "This is an abuse of power," she said clearly, each word deliberate and distinct. "I will make sure you're fired for this." Something in her calm certainty seemed to penetrate Mercer's rage. His eyes widened slightly, reality crashing back in. Slowly he lowered his weapon, though he didn't holster it completely. "Turn around," he ordered, his voice hoarse. "Hands behind your back. You're under arrest for threatening an officer." "No." The refusal came not from Tiana, but from Officer Chen, who had positioned herself between Mercer and the teenager. "She made no threat, James. I heard everything." "You're not arresting her." "Get out of my way, Chen," Mercer growled. "This isn't your call." "Actually, it is." A new voice entered the confrontation, deep, authoritative, and unmistakably angry. Lieutenant Cooper had arrived without anyone noticing, drawn by the escalating radio chatter and the urgent call from Tiana's mother. He stood in the doorway, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. "Officer Mercer," he said, his voice controlled but cold. "Holster your weapon and step back now." Mercer hesitated, his hand tightening on the gun. For one terrible moment, it seemed as though he might refuse a direct order from a superior officer. Then slowly he slid the weapon back into its holster. "Lieutenant," he began, "this situation isn't what it looks like." The girl was— "Save it," Cooper cut him off. "I've heard enough over the radio and I can see what's happening here." He turned to Officer Chen. "Take his weapon and badge. Officer Mercer is relieved of duty, effective immediately." The community center fell silent again, this time with shock at the swift and decisive action. Mercer's face went from red to pale in an instant. "You can't do that," he protested. "There are procedures, which will be followed to the letter," Cooper assured him. "But right now you're a danger to yourself and others. Hand over your weapon and badge to Officer Chen, then wait in her patrol car while I sort this out." For a moment it seemed Mercer might refuse. Then with trembling hands he unclipped his badge and removed his service weapon, surrendering both to Officer Chen, who accepted them with a grim expression. "This isn't over," Mercer muttered as he passed Tiana on his way out. The words were quiet, meant only for her, but in the silent room everyone heard them. Tiana, still shaking from the confrontation, found her voice again. "You're right," she replied, loud enough for all to hear. "It isn't over. Not by a long shot." As Officer Chen escorted Mercer out of the building, Lieutenant Cooper approached Tiana, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle now. "I'm Lieutenant Cooper. Your mother called me directly. She's on her way." Tiana nodded, finally allowing some of her composure to slip as the immediate danger passed. "He pointed his gun at me," she said, her voice smaller now. "Because I was picking up my phone. Because I said I would report him." Cooper's jaw tightened. "I saw the end of it. And from what I can see, there are plenty of witnesses and video evidence of the entire incident." He looked around at the phone still recording. "I'm going to need statements from all of you and copies of any videos you've taken. You're really taking his badge?" Mr. Washington asked, still processing what had just happened. "For now," Cooper confirmed. "Whether it's permanent will depend on the investigation. But what I saw when I walked in here—" He shook his head. "There's no excuse for drawing a weapon on an unarmed minor at a community fundraiser. None." Outside, the flashing lights of additional police cars illuminated the night. Tiana's mother had arrived, running from her car toward the community center entrance. When she saw Tiana, she rushed forward, wrapping her in a tight embrace. "Baby, are you okay? What happened? They said an officer drew his weapon?" Before Tiana could answer, the sound of a car engine revving caught everyone's attention. Officer Mercer, seated in the back of Officer Chen's patrol car, had somehow managed to climb into the front seat. With a screech of tires, he pulled away from the curb, the patrol car lurching forward before disappearing down the street. Lieutenant Cooper was already on his radio, calling in the fleeing officer. "All units, be advised. Officer James Mercer has commandeered a patrol vehicle and is fleeing the scene. Consider him armed and dangerous. Do not approach without backup." Tiana watched the receding taillights of the patrol car, her mother's arms still around her shoulders. The night had taken a turn that no one could have predicted when she'd been setting up decorations just hours earlier. What had begun as a simple fundraiser had transformed into something much bigger, a confrontation that would spark conversations about power, race, and accountability throughout the entire community. And at the center of it all stood Tiana, still trembling slightly from the confrontation, but with a newfound resolve hardening in her eyes. The officer who had pointed a weapon at her chest would be held accountable. She would make sure of it. "It's going to be okay," her mother whispered, pulling her closer. "I'm so proud of you for standing your ground. We'll get through this together." Tiana nodded, watching as Lieutenant Cooper organized the remaining officers, securing the scene and beginning to take statements. The confrontation was over, but the real battle was just beginning. News travels fast in a small city like Springfield. By the time Tiana and her mother arrived at the police station, the videos were already spreading across social media. Shaky footage captured from multiple angles showed Officer Mercer pointing his weapon at an unarmed teenage girl. The clearest video, taken by Deshawn, had already been viewed thousands of times, shared by community members outraged by what they were seeing. The police station buzzed with unusual activity for a weeknight. Officers moved quickly through the hallways, their expressions tense. The desk sergeant looked up as Tiana entered with her mother and Thomas Reed, a well-respected attorney who had been a friend of the family for years. "Ms. Jackson," the sergeant said, recognizing Tiana's mother immediately. "Lieutenant Cooper is expecting you. Please follow me." They were led to a conference room rather than an interrogation room, a small but significant courtesy that hadn't gone unnoticed by Attorney Reed. Inside, Lieutenant Cooper stood talking with Chief Williams, the head of the Springfield Police Department. Both men turned as the door opened. "Ms. Jackson, Tiana," Cooper said, his voice grave. "Thank you for coming. This is Chief Williams." The police chief, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and deep worry lines around his eyes, stepped forward to shake their hands. "I want to start by saying how deeply disturbed I am by what I've seen in the videos. That is not how officers of this department are trained to behave." Tiana's mother, Vanessa Jackson, kept a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders. "With all due respect, Chief Williams, that officer pointed a loaded weapon at my 17-year-old daughter during a school fundraiser. I need to know what you're going to do about it." "And you will," the chief assured her. "First, I'd like to get Tiana's statement about everything that happened from the beginning." Attorney Reed placed his briefcase on the table. "Before that happens, I want to be clear about something. Tiana is here as a victim and witness, not as a suspect. Officer Mercer threatened to arrest her before he fled the scene. That is not happening." "Absolutely not," Lieutenant Cooper agreed quickly. "Tiana has done nothing wrong. We need her statement to build our case against Officer Mercer." "He's still missing?" Vanessa asked, her voice tight with concern. Chief Williams nodded grimly. "He abandoned Officer Chen's patrol car about 2 miles from the community center. We believe he switched to a personal vehicle. Every officer in the department is looking for him, and we've alerted neighboring jurisdictions." Tiana sat down at the conference table, suddenly feeling the weight of the evening's events. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving her exhausted and shaky. But when she spoke, her voice remained clear and strong. "I want to tell you everything," she said. "Not just what happened tonight, but the way he looked at us from the moment he walked in. The way he singled out the black teenagers, the things he said." For the next hour, Tiana recounted every detail of the evening, from Officer Mercer's arrival at the fundraiser to his final, threatening words before being escorted out. Lieutenant Cooper recorded her statement while Chief Williams took notes, his expression growing darker with each new detail. "He never gave a real reason for shutting us down," Tiana concluded. "He just didn't want us there, and when I asked for his badge number, which is my right, he completely lost it." "You did everything right," Lieutenant Cooper assured her. "Asking for his badge number, staying calm, trying to de-escalate. He was the one who violated department policy at every turn." Outside the conference room, the station continued to buzz with activity. Through the glass walls, Tiana could see other teenagers and adults from the fundraiser arriving to give their statements. Deshawn was talking to another officer, likely sharing his video evidence. Mr. Washington stood nearby, his arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a grim expression. "What happens now?" Vanessa asked, her hand squeezing her daughter's shoulder. "You have no right to take her phone," Mr. Washington said firmly. "She's speaking with her mother, who happens to work for the city council, I believe." The mention of the city council seemed to register with Mercer, but it only made him more defensive. "I don't care who her mother is. This event is over, and I want everyone out of here in 5 minutes." "We have the space rented until 9 o'clock, Tiana protested, still holding the phone to her ear. "That's nearly 2 more hours." 5 minutes, Mercer repeated, his hand moving to rest on his weapon again, a gesture that was becoming alarmingly familiar. "Or I start issuing citations for everyone still on the premises." On the other end of the phone, Tiana's mother was asking rapid-fire questions, trying to understand the escalating situation. "He's threatening to cite everyone if we don't leave," Tiana explained. "But we've done nothing wrong, Mom." "Let me talk to him." Her mother's voice came through loud enough that those nearby could hear. Officer Mercer shook his head. "I'm not speaking to anyone on the phone. My orders stand. Clear this place out now." The remaining fundraiser attendees looked at one another uncertainly. Most of the younger children had already been taken home. But there were still about 40 people present, mostly teenagers and adult volunteers. "This isn't right," one of the teachers said quietly, but loud enough to be heard. These kids worked for months planning this event, and they can reschedule it when they learn to follow the rules, Mercer shot back. What rules have been broken? Tiana asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Please tell us specifically what we've done wrong so we can address it. Instead of answering, Officer Mercer turned and walked to the sound system, unplugging it abruptly. The small amount of background music that had been playing cut off, leaving the room in uncomfortable silence. That's community center property, Mr. Washington protested. Consider it evidence, Mercer replied, though of what crime he didn't specify. Tiana's mother was still on the phone, and Tiana could hear her saying she was on her way, that she had called someone named Lieutenant Cooper, who would also be coming. But Tiana wasn't sure they would arrive in time to prevent the complete derailment of the fundraiser. Everyone, she said, raising her voice to address the remaining attendees. I think we should comply with the officer's request for now. We can sort this out later. She looked directly at Officer Mercer as she added, and we will sort it out. Something in her calm determination seemed to irritate him even more than outright defiance would have. His face reddened and he took a step toward her. You threatening me, young lady? His voice was low, dangerous. Not at all, sir, Tiana replied evenly. I'm simply stating that we'll be following up through proper channels about what happened here tonight. The adults in the room had begun to gather the fundraiser materials, the donation box, the raffle tickets, the sign-up sheets for future events. They moved with deliberate care, many keeping their phones recording, none willing to leave Tiana and her friends alone with the increasingly unpredictable officer. As they packed up, a new tension filled the air, the sense that while this confrontation might be ending, something bigger was just beginning. Officer Mercer had unknowingly set in motion events that would extend far beyond this single evening, beyond the walls of the community center, into the heart of long-standing issues within the Springfield Police Department. And at the center of it all stood Tiana Jackson, 17 years old, her fundraiser in ruins around her, but her resolve stronger than ever. 4 minutes left, Officer Mercer announced, checking his watch with exaggerated precision. Anyone still here after that is getting cited for trespassing. Outside, the first flashing lights of another police car appeared through the windows. Help was arriving, but the damage was already done. The escalation had reached its peak. What would happen next would change everything. The flashing lights outside the community center belonged to a patrol car, driven by Officer Chen, a young officer who had joined the force just 2 years ago. She entered the building with a cautious expression, quickly assessing the tense scene before her. Officer Mercer, she said, her voice professional but uncertain. Dispatch said there might be a situation here. Mercer straightened, clearly not pleased by the arrival of another officer. Everything's under control. Just shutting down an unauthorized gathering. Tiana stepped forward, phone still in hand, her mother on the line. That's not true. We have all the proper permits. Officer Mercer is shutting us down without cause. Officer Chen glanced between them, trying to make sense of the conflicting accounts. The community center was nearly empty now, just a handful of adults and teenagers remaining, most of them still recording the interaction. Lieutenant Cooper is on his way, Officer Chen said carefully. He asked everyone to stay put until he arrives. A flash of annoyance crossed Mercer's face. That won't be necessary. I've already handled the situation. By forcing us to end a perfectly legal fundraiser 2 hours early, Tiana's voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the frustration beneath her calm exterior. That's not handling the situation. That's abusing your authority. Officer Mercer's expression darkened. He took a step toward Tiana, his body language openly threatening now. You need to watch your mouth, young lady. Step back. Officer Mercer. The command came from Mr. Washington, who moved to stand beside Tiana. You've been hostile and aggressive from the moment you arrived. We're all waiting for Lieutenant Cooper now. Several of the remaining adults nodded in agreement, their phones still recording. Officer Chen watched the exchange with growing concern, clearly recognizing that something was very wrong with how Mercer had handled the call. I received a noise complaint, Mercer insisted, his voice rising. I responded appropriately. The music was barely audible when you arrived, Lisa Thompson countered. And even if there was a legitimate complaint, that doesn't explain your behavior toward these teenagers, particularly Tiana. Officer Chen's eyes widened slightly as she began to understand what she had walked into. Perhaps we should all take a step back and wait for the lieutenant, she suggested, trying to de-escalate the situation. But Officer Mercer had reached his breaking point. The arrival of another officer, the mention of Lieutenant Cooper, the dozens of phones recording his every move, and most of all, the calm defiance of a 17-year-old girl who refused to be intimidated. It was all too much for a man unaccustomed to having his authority questioned. "Give me that phone," he suddenly demanded, reaching for Tiana's cell phone again. "You're interfering with police business." Tiana instinctively stepped back, clutching her phone tighter. "My mom's on the line." "I'm not interfering with anything. Officer Mercer." Officer Chen's voice was sharp now, all uncertainty gone. "That's enough." But Mercer wasn't listening anymore. In 3 quick strides, he closed the distance between himself and Tiana. Before anyone could react, he grabbed for her wrist, attempting to pry the phone from her hand. "Hey!" Deshawn shouted, moving forward. "You can't do that!" Everything happened at once. Mr. Washington reached out to pull Tiana back. Robert Thompson stepped between them, trying to block Mercer's advance. Officer Chen moved forward, calling for everyone to stop. And Tiana, caught in the middle of it all, stumbled backward, dropping her phone in the process. As she bent to pick it up, Officer Mercer's hand moved to his weapon. In one fluid motion, he unholstered his gun and pointed it directly at Tiana. The room froze. Time seemed to stop as everyone registered the horrifying reality. A police officer was pointing a loaded weapon at an unarmed 17-year-old girl who was simply retrieving her dropped phone. "Don't move," Mercer shouted, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Hands where I can see them." Tiana slowly straightened, her empty hands rising to shoulder height. Her eyes were wide with fear. But there was something else there too. A fierce, burning indignation that this was happening at all. "Officer Mercer." Officer Chen's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Stand down immediately!" "Lower your weapon." She was reaching for something, Mercer insisted, his gun still trained on Tiana. "I saw her go for her waistband." "I was picking up my phone," Tiana said, her voice remarkably steady despite the gun pointed at her chest. "The phone you made me drop when you grabbed my wrist." Around them, every remaining adult and teenager had their phones up, recording what was now a potentially deadly confrontation. Mr. Washington had moved slightly to the side, trying to position himself to intervene if necessary, his face a mask of controlled fury and fear. "James," Officer Chen said, using Mercer's first name in an attempt to break through to him. "She's a teenager at a fundraiser. Look around you. Everyone is recording this. Put the gun down now." For a terrible moment, it seemed as though Mercer might not comply. His finger hovered near the trigger, his face flushed with anger and something that looked almost like panic. The realization that he had crossed a line from which there was no easy return. Mr. Washington stepped forward. "Officer Mercer, I know most of the officers in this precinct, and they know me. I've run this community center for 15 years. If there's a real issue here, you can take it up with me directly, but I have to say, I don't see any legitimate reason for you to disrupt this event further." The implied criticism seemed to push Officer Mercer closer to the edge. His face flushed slightly and his hand moved again, this time resting more deliberately on his weapon. The gesture wasn't lost on anyone. Parents began to gather their children more urgently now, the fundraiser clearly over despite the hour of time remaining on their permit. Tiana felt a crushing disappointment, watching all her hard work dissolve because of one officer's inexplicable hostility. But beneath the disappointment was something else. A slow-burning anger and a determination not to let this pass without challenge. As Officer Mercer continued his unnecessary inspection of the premises, Tiana pulled out her phone and called her mother, who worked for the city council and would know exactly what to do next. What had started as a joyful community event was about to become something very different, a confrontation that would change Tiana's life and the Springfield Police Department forever. The call to her mother went straight to voicemail. Tiana lowered her phone, a knot forming in her stomach as she watched Officer Mercer continue his unnecessary patrol through the community center. The joyful atmosphere of the fundraiser had completely vanished. Some families were already leaving, parents hurrying their children toward the exits with worried glances over their shoulders. "Don't let him ruin everything," Deshawn whispered, appearing at her side. "We worked too hard for this." Tiana nodded, squaring her shoulders. "You're right." She turned to the remaining volunteers. "Let's keep going. We still have snacks to serve and raffle tickets to sell." But the damage was done. The music remained at a barely audible level, the dance area abandoned. The teenagers who stayed huddled in small groups, their eyes following Officer Mercer as he moved through the space like a storm cloud. Lisa Thompson approached Tiana with a concerned expression. "Honey, do you want me to try calling someone at the police department?" "I know Captain Reynolds. He might be able to help." Before Tiana could answer, Officer Mercer's voice cut through their conversation. "Nobody leaves until I've finished my inspection." His tone was sharp, authoritative, loud enough to freeze everyone in place. Mr. Washington stepped forward, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Officer, people are free to come and go as they please. This is a public event at a community center, not a crime scene." Something dangerous flashed across Officer Mercer's face. He walked toward Mr. Washington, stopping just a little too close, invading his personal space. "Are you interfering with police business?" The room fell completely silent. Even the youngest children seemed to sense the growing tension, pressing closer to their parents. More phones appeared, recording the confrontation. "I'm simply stating facts," Mr. Washington replied calmly, not backing down but keeping his tone respectful. "These folks have done nothing wrong. If you have specific concerns about safety or permit violations, please state them clearly. Otherwise, you're disrupting a perfectly legal community event without cause." Officer Mercer's hand moved to rest on his belt again, close to his weapon. The gesture wasn't subtle, it was meant to intimidate. "I'll determine what's legal here." Tiana felt a chill run through her. She had heard about moments like this, had listened to family members and friends describe the sudden shift when an encounter with police moved from routine to dangerous. She had never expected to experience it herself, especially not at a school fundraiser surrounded by children and teachers. Making a quick decision, she stepped forward, placing herself between Mr. Washington and the officer. "Officer Mercer, could I please have your badge number? I'd like to include it in my report to the event organizers." The simple request, her right as a citizen, seemed to trigger something in Officer Mercer. His face flushed and his eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Your badge number, sir," Tiana repeated, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And your supervisor's name, please, for my records." Around them, several people had their phones aimed directly at the interaction now. Robert Thompson moved closer to his wife, who was standing near Tiana, his expression grim but determined. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Officer Mercer said, looking down at Tiana with undisguised contempt. "You and your friends here playing at being community organizers." The comment stung, but Tiana didn't let it show on her face. "We're not playing at anything, sir. We've raised over $300 tonight for after-school programs that help kids in this neighborhood. Programs that keep them safe and give them opportunities." "Right," Mercer scoffed. "Because without your little fundraiser, they'd all be out causing trouble, wouldn't they?" The racial undertone in his comment wasn't lost on anyone. A murmur ran through the crowd. Deshawn moved closer to Tiana, his phone still recording. "That's not what I said at all," Tiana replied, fighting to keep her voice level. "These programs benefit all students at Westside High." "Officer," Lisa Thompson interjected, "I think we're getting off track here. If there are no actual violations to address, perhaps—" "I'm not talking to you," Mercer snapped, not even looking in her direction, his eyes still fixed on Tiana. "I'm talking to the person claiming to be in charge here. I am in charge of this event," Tiana said firmly. "And I'd still like your badge number, please." Someone in the crowd called out, "She has the right to ask for that information." Officer Mercer's head whipped around, trying to identify who had spoken. "Who said that?" "Step forward." Nobody moved. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Parents were gathering their children, moving toward the exits despite Mercer's earlier command to stay. Tiana's classmates had formed a loose semicircle behind her, a silent show of support that didn't go unnoticed by the officer. "This whole thing reeks of trouble," Mercer muttered, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. "Wouldn't be surprised if half the cash you collected tonight disappears before it ever reaches any program." The accusation hung in the air, blatant and ugly. Tiana felt as if she'd been slapped. Beside her, Deshaun stiffened, his free hand curling into a fist before he deliberately relaxed it. "That's completely inappropriate, officer," Mr. Washington said sharply. "These students have proven themselves to be responsible and trustworthy members of our community. I won't stand here and listen to you insult them without cause. My badge number is 47291, Officer Mercer suddenly announced, his voice loud and mocking. "Feel free to report me. See where that gets you." He took a step closer to Tiana. "You think anyone's going to take the word of a teenager over a police officer with 12 years of service?" The question wasn't really meant to be answered. It was another intimidation tactic, one that might have worked if Tiana had been alone. But she wasn't alone. She had the support of her community, teachers, parents, friends, all watching, many recording, none willing to let this injustice pass unchallenged. "Yes," she replied simply. "I do think they'll listen, especially with all this video evidence of your behavior." For the first time, Officer Mercer seemed to fully register just how many phones were pointed in his direction. His expression shifted, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "All right, that's enough. This gathering is over. Everyone needs to disperse immediately. This is now an official order." Robert Thompson stepped forward. "On what grounds, officer? There's been no violation of the law here. Disturbing the peace. Potential fire code violations. Suspicious activity." Mercer rattled off, each accusation more vague than the last. "That's ridiculous," Lisa Thompson said. "We've been nothing but cooperative, despite your provocative behavior." Tiana tried once more to reach her mother, dialing the number and putting the phone to her ear, while keeping her eyes on Officer Mercer. This time her mother answered. "Mom," she said quickly, "we need help at the community center. There's a police officer here, badge number 47291, who's trying to shut down our fundraiser for no reason." She paused, listening. "Yes, we have all the permits. Everything's in order. He's being really inappropriate." Officer Mercer's eyes flashed with anger when he realized who she was calling. "Give me that phone," he demanded, reaching toward her. Tiana took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. "Mom, he's trying to take my phone now," she said quickly. "His name is Officer Mercer." Several people moved forward at once, Mr. Washington, Robert Thompson, and two of the other parent volunteers, placing themselves between Tiana and the increasingly agitated officer. The warm spring evening buzzed with energy as teenagers gathered at the Westside Community Center. The old brick building had been transformed with colorful streamers and hand-painted banners, announcing the fundraiser for local after-school programs. At the center of it all stood Tiana Jackson, her dark curly hair pulled back in a neat ponytail as she directed volunteers and greeted community members with a bright smile. At 17, Tiana carried herself with the confidence of someone much older. An honor student at Westside High, she had organized the entire event herself, securing permits, recruiting volunteers, and even convincing local restaurants to donate food. The turnout was better than she had hoped. Nearly 100 people filled the community center's main hall, the music pumping just loud enough to create atmosphere without drowning out conversation. "We've already raised over $300, Tiana told her friend Deshaun, who was manning the donation table. "If we keep this up, we might hit our goal tonight." Deshaun grinned and adjusted his glasses. "Nobody can say no to you when you get that determined look in your eyes." The event was scheduled to run until 9, giving them another 2 hours. Parents chatted in small groups while younger kids played in the designated activity area. A group of Tiana's classmates had formed a dance circle in one corner, their laughter rising above the music. Everything was going perfectly according to plan until the front doors swung open and Officer James Mercer stepped inside. Tiana noticed him immediately, his stiff posture and stern expression a stark contrast to the cheerful atmosphere of the room. Even before he spoke, something in his demeanor made her stomach tighten with unease. He scanned the room slowly, his gaze lingering on the dancing teenagers, his mouth set in a thin line of disapproval. Officer Mercer was a 12-year veteran of the Springfield Police Department. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished to a shine. He moved through the crowd with an air of authority that made people step back automatically, creating a path toward where the music was playing. Without speaking to anyone, he reached over and turned the volume down, then addressed the startled teenager who had been managing the playlist. "We've received noise complaints about this location. Tiana made her way over, summoning her most respectful tone. Good evening, officer. I'm Tiana Jackson, the organizer of this event. We have all the proper permits, including for the music, until 9 o'clock. She reached for the folder she kept on the nearby table, which contained copies of all the documentation. Officer Mercer barely glanced at the papers she offered. Permits or not, you need to keep it down. Some people in this neighborhood work nights and need to sleep. I understand, sir. We've already turned it down once when Mrs. Henderson from next door asked us to. The volume has been at this level for the past hour without any complaints. Something flickered in Officer Mercer's eyes, a flash of irritation at being challenged, even politely. He looked past Tiana at the crowd, his gaze settling on the group of black teenagers who had stopped dancing and were now watching the interaction with wary expressions. What exactly is going on here anyway? He asked, his tone suggesting that whatever it was, he didn't approve. It's a fundraiser for after-school programs at Westside High, Tiana explained, maintaining her composure despite the growing tension. We're raising money for art supplies and sports equipment. We've been planning this for months and cleared everything with the community center director and the city parks department. A middle-aged woman who had been helping serve refreshments approached, her friendly smile aimed at diffusing the situation. Officer, I'm Lisa Thompson, one of the parent volunteers. We're wrapping up in a couple of hours and we've been keeping an eye on the noise level. The kids have worked really hard on this event. Officer Mercer's expression didn't soften. If anything, his stance became more rigid. I'll need to see identification from whoever's in charge here. That would be me, Tiana said, reaching for her school ID in her back pocket. I'm the student council president and the lead organizer. Again, all our permits are right here if you'd like to review them. The officer took her school ID, studying it with unnecessary scrutiny. Several other teenagers had gathered nearby now, watching with concerned expressions. Deshaun had pulled out his phone and was holding it at waist level, the camera app open. You expect me to believe a kid your age organized all this? Mercer's tone was dismissive, almost mocking. A tall boy named Andre stepped forward. She did, actually. Tiana's been working on this for months. She even got the mayor to donate. Officer Mercer's eyes narrowed as he looked between the teenagers. The community center had grown quieter, the music now just background to the tense exchange. Parents were gathering their younger children, some moving closer to observe while others headed for the exits, sensing trouble. Let me see those permits again, Mercer demanded, this time holding out his hand. Tiana handed over the folder, which contained not only the event permit, but also food handling certificates, the community center rental agreement, and even a letter of support from the school principal. As Officer Mercer flipped through them with obvious disinterest, more phones appeared among the crowd, recording the interaction. These seemed to be in order, he finally admitted, sounding almost disappointed. But I'm still getting complaints about the noise. From who exactly? Asked Mr. Washington, the community center director who had just arrived from his office at the back of the building. I've been here all evening and my phone hasn't rung once about noise. Officer Mercer's jaw tightened. I don't need to disclose that information. A complaint was called into dispatch and I'm responding to it. Something about his explanation didn't ring true. The community center was in a commercial area, with only a few residential buildings nearby. The music wasn't nearly loud enough to disturb anyone outside the immediate vicinity, and they'd been careful to keep it at a reasonable level. Well, as you can see, everything's in order here, Tiana said calmly, though her heart was beating faster. She'd heard enough stories from friends and family about encounters with police to know that staying calm was essential. We'll make sure to keep the music at this level or lower for the rest of the evening. Instead of acknowledging her response or leaving, Officer Mercer began walking around the community center, peering into corners and side rooms as if searching for violations. The happy atmosphere of the fundraiser had completely evaporated, replaced by nervous whispers and concerned glances. Tiana followed at a respectful distance. Is there something specific you're looking for, Officer Mercer? He turned sharply at the sound of his name, which he could see from his badge. Just making sure everything else is up to code? Fire exits clear? Occupancy limits being observed? Yes, sir. Mr. Washington helped us with all that. We're well under the maximum occupancy and all exits are marked and clear. As they spoke, Tiana noticed Officer Mercer's eyes continually drifting to groups of black teenagers, particularly the boys, while barely glancing at the white students or adults present. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Lisa Thompson approached again, this time with her husband Robert, who worked as a paralegal at a local law firm. "Officer, I think we've established that everything here is legitimate and properly permitted. The kids have done nothing wrong. Is there something else we can help you with?" Officer Mercer's hand moved to rest on his belt close to his weapon, a gesture that sent a ripple of tension through the onlookers. "I'm just doing my job, making sure everything's safe here." "And we appreciate that," Robert Thompson said carefully, his eyes noting the officer's hand position. "But these kids have worked really hard on this event, and your presence is making everyone uncomfortable. If there are no violations, perhaps you could continue your patrol elsewhere?" The suggestion that he leave seemed to irritate Officer Mercer further. He squared his shoulders and looked directly at Tiana. "Who authorized you to use this facility?" Tiana took a deep breath. They'd already been through this. "Mr. Washington, the community center director. He's standing right over there. And we have the signed rental agreement in the folder I showed you. And who signed off on minors holding an event without adequate adult supervision?" Now Tiana felt a flare of frustration breaking through her careful composure. "Sir, we have 8 parent volunteers present, plus Mr. Washington and 2 teachers from Westside High. They're all listed on the permit application, which was approved by the city." More phones were recording now, capturing Officer Mercer's increasingly hostile questioning and Tiana's composed responses. The contrast between the officer's aggressive stance and the teenager's calm demeanor was striking to everyone watching. As the confrontation continued, Tiana became aware that this wasn't about noise complaints or permits or safety regulations. Something else was driving Officer Mercer's behavior, something she'd seen before but had hoped to avoid tonight. "I'm going to need to see ID from all the adults present," Officer Mercer announced, looking around the room challengingly.